Has capitalism used all of the tools available to it in its worldwide struggle with socialism? Some of us don't think so. I'll be right back. Capitalism hasn't used the best tool of all in its struggle against socialism, and that's capitalism itself. Roughly 94% of the people in capitalist America make their living from wages or salaries. Only 6% are true capitalists in the sense of deriving their income from ownership of the means of production. Both groups enjoy the highest standard of living the world has ever known, certainly far better than anything socialism has produced for its people. We can win the argument once and for all by simply making more of our people capitalists. More than 100 years ago, Abe Lincoln signed the Homestead Act, making it possible for our people to own land. This was a revolutionary development. Ownership of land in most of the world had not been possible for the ordinary citizen. Generally, land belonged to the king or emperor, and through him to the favored aristocracy. The Homestead Act set the pattern for American capitalism. Today, 53 million Americans own their own homes. Now we need an industrial Homestead Act, and that isn't impossible. As a matter of fact, any number of companies and corporations in America have tried in a variety of ways to spread ownership to their employees. In San Francisco, a man named Louis Kelso has evolved a plan which a number of corporations have already implemented. Now, when a corporation needs to expand, it finances the expansion either by borrowing or by selling a new stock issue. Under the Kelso plan, an employee trust is formed. A company desiring new capital sells a new stock issue to this employee trust. The trust, in turn, borrows the money from a bank or lending unit using the stock as collateral. Each individual employee winds up owning stock in the company directly proportionate to his salary or wage level, and he has a vested interest in the company's ability to prosper and to increase earnings. Over the next 10 years, there'll probably be $500 billion worth of new investment for businesses and industrial expansion. It can also be $500 billion worth of corporate ownership by employees. An ever-increasing number of citizens thus would have two sources of income, a paycheck and a share of the profits. Could there be a better answer to the stupidity of Karl Marx than millions of workers individually sharing in the ownership of the means of production? Some years ago, an executive of the Ford Motor Company was showing the late Walter Reuther, head of the Auto Workers Union, through the Ford assembly plant in Cleveland, Ohio. Pointing to the latest in automated machinery, he said, "Walter, you will have a hard time collecting union dues from those machines." And Walter replied, "You will have a harder time selling them automobiles." The obvious answer neither of them thought of was that owners of machines can buy automobiles. Tomorrow I'll tell you of another plan, one that would give every registered voter in America an active share of ownership in the industry of America. It's possible to have that and the plan I've just described. All it takes is a bill by Congress. This is Ronald Reagan. Thanks for listening. Socialism makes promises only capitalism can keep. I'll be right back. Yesterday, I told you of a plan used by some industrial corporations to make their employees stockholders, part owners of the firm. Today, I want to tell you about another idea for giving every registered voter ownership in the business and industrial structure of America. Now, this is not a half-baked utopian dream. It's a well-thought-out, fully documented program called the National Dividend Plan, which has the endorsement of well-known economists and political scientists. Lionel D. Eady and Company, a research subsidiary of one of the great financial institutions, Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner, and Smith, did a feasibility study and endorsed it. Other endorsers include the American Enterprise Institute, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the U.S. Junior Chamber, the JCs, the General Federation of Women's Clubs, the United States Savings and Loan League, and the National Association of Manufacturers. Now, by the way, this plan is not offered as a substitute or alternative for the plan I discussed yesterday, whereby employees could acquire ownership in the companies they work for. We could actually have both. And let me repeat what I said yesterday. We won't be taking anything away from anybody in the process, nor will those who benefit have to dig into their savings. Right now, the income tax on corporation profits is 48%. The National Dividend Plan calls for setting a ceiling of 50%. Investors would be assured that the corporation tax would never go above 50%. This should encourage more investment. Since the plan would also end the present unfair double tax under which the corporation profits are taxed, and then those distributed as dividends are taxed again as individual shareholders' income. This would end. You'll see why in a minute. The corporation tax would continue to be collected by government. However, instead of government spending it in our behalf, we'd get to spend it ourselves. Every citizen registered to vote in the previous federal election would receive a pro rata share of the total corporation tax collected by government. This means the registered voters of America would be sharing in roughly half the profits of American industry. Checks would be sent on a quarterly basis, and it's estimated that when the program is fully implemented, the payments to each individual should be $500 or more each year, tax-free. An elderly couple on a pension or Social Security would be getting an additional $1,000 a year as their share of an industrial prosperity. Registered 18-year-olds would have $500 a year to help them with their education, and each of us would have a personal stake in helping our economy to expand and produce more. One little-known statistic shows how we could all help to increase our annual dividend. A 0.1% increase in output per man-hour adds $1 billion to the gross national product. A 2 or 3% increase would make us the world's greatest producer. This basically is the plan. Tomorrow I'll give you more details, including what we can do to make the National Dividend Plan a reality. This is Ronald Reagan. Thanks for listening. We can all own a piece of the action. It only takes an act of Congress. I'll be right back. This is the third day I've been talking about capitalism and a couple of ideas that could make all of us capitalists. When my old friend Congressman H.R. Charlie Gross of Iowa retired last year, he gave his colleagues a farewell address that challenged every one of them to start thinking about the next generation instead of the next election. For a quarter of a century, he's been the conscience of the Congress, pleading constantly for statesmanship and responsibility. Very seldom did they support him in overwhelming numbers, but in their hearts, every one of them knew he was dead right and they were dead wrong. In that final address, he presented a simple idea that could resolve most of our problems and make this nation once again the golden hope of all mankind. The idea he presented was not his. It was the work of many distinguished scholars and men successful in industrial America. It's known as NDP, the National Dividend Plan. As I told you yesterday, it's a plan whereby government, which is collecting in taxes about half the profits of all U.S. corporations, would give that money back directly to the people, with each registered voter sharing in the benefits of free enterprise. I'm sure yesterday's broadcast must have left you with a few questions. Well, let me see if I can give you some additional facts and answer some of those questions. First of all, NDP will not cause great disruption or damage to the necessary functions of the federal government. It would be phased into operation over a 5-year period, 20% a year. The present corporation tax accounts for about 15% of total federal revenue. So each year for 5 years, the reduction would be 1/5 of that, or about 3%. Now, normally, federal revenues grow by about 9% a year just from the growth of the economy. So even though the government would be giving to all the people the corporation tax, government would still have an increase in revenue each year. In addition to this normal growth rate in revenue, there would be an additional stimulant because of the money freed for investment and spending. This not only stimulates more economic activity in the private sector, it also generates even more tax revenues for government. At the same time, many government programs could be reduced, and some completely eliminated. Every family would be receiving tax-free funds based on the number of registered voters in the family. This would eliminate the need for many supplemental aid programs and the bureaucracies that supervise them. The wealth of a nation is measured by the industry it creates and the goods it produces. For the most part, government spending does neither. On the other hand, increased activity in the private sector does. It has a multiplier effect. The National Dividend Plan would involve distribution of earned dollars the government is taking in taxes from private industry and theoretically already spending in our behalf. The new plan calls instead for letting each American spend his share of those dollars the way he chooses. Our congressmen know of the plan, thanks to former Congressman Gross. Now it's up to us to see that Congress knows that we know it. Our job is not so much to make Congress see the light as to make them feel the heat. This is Ronald Reagan. Thanks for listening.